After a lifetime of crime, 16 years on the run, a lengthy trial, and 5 years in federal prison, officials announced today that James Whitey Bulger is dead at the age of 89. He was killed soon after arriving in a new facility in West Virginia, where he'd been transferred due to what was described as an ailing health. The Boston Globe is reporting a fellow inmate with Mafia ties, they say, is now being investigated for his murder. Bulger was, of course, Boston's most infamous criminal, had been serving a life sentence for his involvement in 11 murders, though he was accused of plenty more. I'm joined by Brian Kelly, former assistant U.S. attorney and lead prosecutor responsible for putting Bulger behind bars. He's now a partner at Nixon Peabody. Good to see you, Brian.
See you, Jim.
Peter Gelzinis, former longtime columnist of the Boston Herald, has covered Bulger's trial and his life extensively. Also spent his life in South Boston. Peter, good to see you. John Red Shea, who was a top lieutenant in Bulger's Winter Hill Gang in the 80s and 90s, spent 12 years in prison for cocaine trafficking. Thanks so much for being here, John. I appreciate it. Let's start with you. Do you know anything about this so-called Mafia-connected person or people who killed Bulger?
No, I'm sure we'll hear the details the coming days, though.
Are you sure we'll hear the details?
Yeah, everything gets out, and this will too.
You know, Jay Carney, who you spent a lot of time in a courtroom with, who obviously represented Bulger, put out a statement. He said, "I was proud to be appointed by the federal court to represent James Bulger. He was sentenced to life in prison, but as a result of decisions made by the Federal Bureau of Prisons, that sentence has been changed to a death penalty." I don't want to put words in Jay's mouth, but I will for a second. As you probably know, this facility had 2 inmate murders in the last year. Do you think it's a coincidence that the Bureau of Prisons decided to put Bulger there?
Look, prison's a violent place, and someone who has a past as an informant is not going to be looked upon in high regard by the inmates. But I think if he's suggesting the government did it on purpose, that's a little far-fetched.
I don't know if he said, I'm asking the question, but you don't think he put it on purpose. You spent time in a facility.
That's
Could
correct.
something like this happen
Absolutely.
without the guards cooperating?
Absolutely. I said
absolutely could happen or couldn't?
Absolutely could happen.
Could.
I said this prior to him going to prison. I said if he is put into general population or even close to general population with the right people in that facility, they will do what they have to. These guys...
Because he was a rat? Because that's what put you over the edge.
Because he was a rat, but not only that, in some cases it's because of notoriety. Hey, I took down a legend in their mind.
So what's the mood in South Boston? I have to say, as I didn't spend my whole life here, unlike you. When I would encounter people in South Boston, when I moved here, who would sing the praises of Whitey Bulger and what he did for the poor lady next door, are people, anybody mourning his murder?
I haven't taken the pulse, but I can tell you in New South Boston, more people relate to him through Johnny Depp than who he was. I mean, I think it's not going to, you know, the places that they hang out now that used to be the blood buckets of blood before. You know, these kids, millennials, are more interested in watching the Patriots or.
But how about your generation? Some of them are still alive, Peter Gelzinis, as you know.
You know what I think. I think he was probably pretty philosophical about how things were going to end for him. I really do. And I don't think at this point that, you know, he was gonna scream and yell about where he was going. I think he knew what ultimately could happen to him. How
do the alum of the U.S. Attorney's Office, do you care that he's dead?
Well, you know, I don't want to sound heartless, but I'm certainly not going to lose any sleep over it. He's a violent guy, psychotic killer. He had a lot of victims, and he's a violent guy who met a violent end. So it's hard to feel a lot of sympathy for him. I
think you said earlier today, I know you'll correct me if I got it wrong, Brian, that his years in prison, his death brought some closure to the families of victims. But, you know, at the time of the prosecution, I would see surviving family members interviewed on television saying things like, it's good that, I'm paraphrasing, Bulger's in that chair, but there should have been other government officials sitting next to Bulger who facilitated his crimes.
Look, you can always prosecute more, and in fact, there's at least one FBI agent who's sitting in Florida State Prison right now because of his role with Bulger.
You know, you at one time referred to this guy as a father figure, and then all of a sudden found that he was a rat, using the word and partial title of your book. I know it changed. You said at once, I didn't want to see Whitey captured by the government. I'd rather see him face his own peers that he did wrong. I don't know if these are peers or not.
I'm not sure, but hopefully that's what happened. He faced his own peers, but peers that were stand-up guys. And what I mean by a stand-up guy is someone who accepted his responsibility without putting it on someone else's shoulders.
Responsibility to kill him.
Responsibility for the crimes that they've done. and not giving up anybody to the sacrifice.
What would you have done if you were in that West Virginia prison with Whitey Bulger?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't think it would have been a good thing to have me with him by any means. I don't want to predict the outcome, but it wouldn't have been good for him, first of all. Second of all, you say about me and the father figure. I was a I was a very young man at the time. I was very well influenced by him, and coming from the neighborhood that I came from and stuff like that, and the environment that I came from, I was influenced and I looked up to him.
You know, I hate the word closure, and I didn't mean because you used it. I just never liked the word terribly much. Right. You know a lot of the families. I mean, I mean, is there closure in the death of
I don't think
Bulger?
there's closure. I mean, I suppose, you know, in a weird way, I suppose that object of hate is taken away now. And that could, you know, create its own different set of problems. But I think, you know, in a way, you know, the one thing I think, and this is a tough thing to say, but a lot of people were in that circle, and I don't mean they were in it deeply. I mean, there were obviously some totally innocent civilians that were
were in the circle of people.
The circle of people
was convicted of helping to kill
in his world.
Yeah,
and
what?
They got too close to the flame. And I think, you know, that's not everybody, but I mean, but when you think about those days,
a lot of the victims had nothing to do with it.
Well, that's true.
There's a lot of mayhem. Even victims like who were poisoned by the drugs he peddled throughout Southie, cocaine, marijuana, all sorts of things he peddled, and you know, he corrupted younger people who looked up to him. He was a vicious guy who had a very pernicious influence throughout Southie and the city, and so, you know, he's a violent guy who probably got what he deserved.
You know, I have a feeling that former federal prosecutors don't like comparative justice analysis, so let me apologize in advance. Catherine Grigg, who's the woman he was on the run with for years, if my math is right, is going to serve 8 years in prison, is going to serve 21 months on top of that 8 years because she refused to cooperate and testify whether or not there were other people involved in helping them, even under a grant of immunity. She's going to end up doing maybe, what, 1.5 times as much time as a convicted murderer is doing. Is there something wrong with that picture, Brian?
Well, look, you know, from the victim's perspective, if she had not facilitated his fugitive status, he would have been brought to justice much sooner. They would have heard their family story told much sooner, and but for people like her, he wouldn't have been able to survive on the lam for so long.
Does the Grigg story bother you? About how much time she's serving versus how much time Bulger did?
Well, of course, in that sense, but on the other hand, for me, she was protecting an informant, and I don't.
How do you feel?
With
I mean, how do you? I mean, you're happy he's dead. Are you happy he was murdered as opposed to dying a natural death?
I'm not happy about anybody being murdered or killed.
Him, you're not.
And that said, there is some justice. There is some closure for me personally, and you know what? It was a good thing. It was. You're right.
Was it a good thing?
Yeah, I mean, you know, like I said, he's part of another time in a way. You know, I don't.
But he still lives on through the lives of a lot of people that Brian has mentioned.
Yeah, he does. But you know, the thing is too. Sometimes I think this whole idea, this revelation of him being a rat, is a little strange. I think people he was, and that's what I'm saying. But I think the people who knew him understood that for him to be able to have done what he did in plain view for so long, there had to be some give and take with law enforcement. There had to be.
There was a lot of take.
Let me tell you how I feel about that. Let me say how I feel about that.
Yeah.
We were always told that he paid for it. We were never told that he was giving information to get information. It was always that he was paying for it.
You have the final word, Brian.
Well, he did both. Yeah. He paid, he talked, and he had a long criminal spree that fortunately came to an end once they caught him.
It's good to see you, Brian. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it, Peter. Be well.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.